Good afternoon and welcome to this session on looking at physical climate risks. How can investors assess and manage physical climate risk and support climate adaptation and resilience? It's great to see the room so full. I really like this format of having these round tables. I think it makes a very different atmosphere to some of the other sessions. So really pleased to see the room so full, and hopefully we'll have a really lively and interesting discussion for you this afternoon. If, like me, you're suffering still from jet lag, I think we could all still do with that. We're nearly there. So according to the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessments, the world will face severe physical climate risks before the end of this century, even under low emission scenarios. A failure to deliver timely and deep emissions cuts is escalating the physical risk associated with the climate crisis. This necessitates ambitious, accelerated action to adapt to climate change. And as we've heard this morning, for example, in the Climate and Nature plenary, we know this isn't necessarily easy. A lot of the work that needs to be done can be very small scale, it can be localized, and isn't always necessarily immediately investable. So the key objectives of today's session is really to highlight, again, as if we need it, the importance of adaptation and thinking more broadly about systemic resilience, not necessarily just at one project or one asset level, but more broadly, what is the wider systemic resilience issues that we need to address. We want to cover what investors can or are and can do to adapt and help build these more resilient systems. But we also recognize that we don't have all the answers at this point. We want to highlight some of those key challenges, some of the next steps that are needed to address this in a more systemic and effective manner. So we will have a panel discussion. The floor will be filled later. But we wanted to kick off with something a bit different. We've all seen the impacts of physical risk around the world over the past few years. The increasing number of natural disasters, the increasing intensity of those natural disasters, whether floods, wildfires, extreme heat, and so on. But nowhere are those impacts more critical and the adaptation more essential than in small island nations. And so I'm delighted to welcome Keiden Kintol from the Republic of Palau's Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Compact of Free Association Trust Fund, to talk about why this is such an important issue for him and his country, and some of the measures that they are taking to address these critical factors. So please welcome Keiden to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? O genki desu ka? Genki desu. My name is Keiden Kintol. I'm from the Republic of Palau. And I am here representing the Republic of Palau Compact of Free Association Trust Fund. The Republic of Palau is composed of more than 360 rock islands, as similar to what you see in the screen up here. As you can see, Palau is a low-lying island with above about 5-meter sea level rise, sea level. So we are very prone to climate change, especially certain impacts of climate change that are from climate change. So I will try to make my presentation as quick as possible with a 5-minute time limit that I have. So bear with me if some of the information are too much for you to see. When managing climate risk, one of the things that we discussed as a board was that we have to diversify our investment. Currently, our portfolio is, we're invested in U.S. domestic, U.S. equities, non-U.S. equities, international, global, alternative investment, and fixed income. So we have a very diverse portfolio, and having that diverse portfolio will kind of protect you against, because some areas may be prone to climate change and some may not. So if you have that diversity, you are well protected in your investment. Also, green investments. Right now, as of today, our total trust fund is about $300 million 20% of that total trust fund we have allocated into green investments, most specifically impact investing in terms of SDG 7 on clean air and SDG 13 on climate adaptation. So those, we try to, there's a book that's from Caisse and Partner called Leadership Challenge. And they say one of the things that's in the book is DWSYWD, do what you say you will do. And that's one of the things that we live by and then we put into consideration in all our efforts. Engagements. Managing the risk, you have to consistently engage with your stakeholders. We engage with our consultants on a daily basis. We engage in our investment managers. We require our investment managers to be UNPRI signatories, and if they are not, we fire them on the spot. So that's how we are truly engaged in what we do. Long-term perspective, when the United States first initiated $60 million into our sovereign fund, we've grown it up to $300 million right now, and it's supposed to expire in 2044. But we, as a board, increased the duration to be perpetual. So we continue. If you are invested into climate change, it is a long-term, although climate change is a slow action, slow effect, but it's for sure impact is realistic, and it is real. And we in Palau are the ones feeling the effect of climate change right now. Okay? Assessments. Assessment, I cannot stress any further about the importance of assessment. We do climate risk analysis. We have a toolkit that we use to assess future conditions, and then we take a look at those conditions and we make decisions based on the board decisions on how to reallocate or allocate our resources to particular and relevant investment opportunities. Climate scenario analysis, we have to do climate scenario analysis to see where we want to go, and if this happens, what's going to happen and what's our contingency plans to address those issues and concerns. Data and research. We've heard in the plenary discussions, we've heard in the conference, data and research are very important, but they're only as important if they are valid. Because if they're not valid, they would give you the wrong equation, they would give you the wrong results. So we have to have the valid data and valid research from the IPCC, the respectable and valid information from those. Climate risk metrics. We have to use climate risk, valid climate risk metrics. Okay? There are different benchmarks out there, but we have to choose what are the most appropriate benchmarks and what are truly the benchmark that give you the accurate picture that you want. This is a very busy slide over here. Palau, as well as other regions in Micronesia, are very prone to climate change. So these are the impacts that you see that are they are being impacted by Palau as we speak right now. I cannot speak for other countries within the region, but I can speak for Palau. Ocean acidification, coral bleaching, the rising temperature causes this, and we rely on our fisheries, we rely on tourism, we rely on our land for sustainability, for our livelihood, and this is a big threat that's impacting our lands and islands right now. Rising sea level. As I told you, about 5 meters above sea level is Palau. That's a huge, IPCC states that when we reach 2 degrees Celsius, it's about 9 meters already by that time. By that time, Palau is under the ocean by that time. We cannot wait. The urgency is right now. And if you're gonna act, I was very impressed by the Prime Minister of Japan in his speech. You know, it's time for action. And it is an opportunity, a great opportunity, and a great pleasure to be standing here right now and addressing to you investment asset owners, investment asset owners also, I wish I can relay our point to all of you guys over here right now. Extreme weather events. We've seen droughts, we've seen typhoons, cyclones that have happened in Palau more rapidly than ever. Okay? Water and food scarcity, food security. We rely more in our lands and in our oceans and our water. It is jeopardizing our very livelihood in the Pacific, especially in Palau. Health risk. There are more borne diseases out there because of rising temperatures. Dengue fever, all these different heat strokes that are happening right now as we speak. Economic impacts. Palau's major GDP is made up of tourism. And if this climate change keeps happening, we will lose our biggest and our most investment that we use to run our island nation. And limited resources because we have limited funding, we have limited capacity, technical capacity. That's why we are here and learning from everyone and hope that we can get the support that we need as of now. How do we address the impact of this climate change to Palau, especially Palau? We need global responsibility. We need a shared responsibility. Reduce your carbon footprints. Donate to climate organizations. Emergency response, a helping hand to address and assist those nations that are prone to climate change as of now. Support climate adaptation. Support sustainable tourism. If you guys decide to go traveling or go on a travel, choose eco-friendly destinations. It's everyone's responsibility. And if we all put our hands together, if we all do our part, you know, I heard one time, Donald Trump in his speech when he was running, he said climate change is a myth. I don't think it's a myth. In Palau, we're experiencing right now. It is not a myth. It is for real, ladies and gentlemen. Respect the indigenous knowledge. You know, we heard the speakers at the plenary today in the morning. 80% of these resources are owned by indigenous people. We are the indigenous people. I am here, standing here right now, representing our indigenous people. Okay? This is our journey to impact investing. We first heard the word SRI or SI, responsible investing, in 2016. We were like, what is this? In 2016, we initiated our initial discussion, and on 2018 to 2019, we made the consideration, we made an effort to require all our investment managers to be UNPRI signatories. And again, if they were not, we fired them on the spot, 2 of our investment managers. It is unfortunate, but again, it's either profit or planet. You cannot, well, maybe you can get the best of both worlds, but something has to be given. Something has to be taken away. So we have a responsibility to maximize our profit, but we also have a responsibility to keep our island nations and keep our people alive and free like the rest of the world. It's only fair. We became a UNPRI in 2020 to 2021. We became an asset owner for the UNPRI. And as of today, going forward, we continue to assess, we continue to monitor every changes within our investment managers. We want to know. If our investment managers fired one of their employees, we want to know. If one of our investment managers hired a new employee, we want to know. We consistently engage with our investment managers. This is the current status of Palau. We may not be in the purple mark in there, we may not be in the high risk, but we will get there. So a call of action is needed right now, and we need everyone's hand. We need everyone's assistance to address these concerns that we are feeling right now. These are statistics and data. As you can see, more droughts, more cyclones, more tsunamis, more all of these natural disasters that are happening, that we're feeling. And yet we have the least, costs of this climate change, and we have the most to be impacted by the climate change. This is the reality. Because I only have 5 minutes, I have thousands of pictures, but I only have 5 minutes, so I only show those couple of pictures over there. We have typhoons, we have droughts, we have saltwater intrusions, we have dengue fever outbreak, we have, as you can see, the fire over there, the smoke. That was on Sunday, 3 days before I came. That was on Sunday. Our landfill was burnt. It's not a spontaneous combustion, ladies and gentlemen. It's from high temperatures that causes these fires to consume. Look at the effect of those fires, and it can keep happening if there's no address and no action to address those. Palau is well known of, you can Google it, Palau is one of the 7 underwater wonders of the world. Tourists come to Palau every year to see our jellyfish lake. We have 9 jellyfish lakes in Palau that are highly poisonous jellyfish, but only in Palau, it's not poison. And you can swim with the jellyfish. The last drought, the last El Nino, the last El Nino in Palau, 5 of the 9 jellyfish lakes, all the jellyfish died. And this is our livelihood. This is what brings people to come and see what Palau is. It truly has an impact to our island nation. I'm sorry. I hope I hit the mark on this. Thank you all very much, sir.
I can invite my panelists. We've got a tough act to follow now. Thank you so much, Keiden. Incredibly powerful, and it sets us a big challenge for today, this session, and going forward in terms of how we can best support, what action investors can take to support those efforts. Okay, great. Well, I'm delighted to say we've got a very diverse panel in terms of the types of organizations that we're represented today. And I'll give them all the opportunity to introduce themselves when I pose the first question, which is really around climate resilience strategy. And thinking about what does climate resilience mean for your organizations, and how did you get started on this? How do you begin to focus on physical climate risk measurements to enhance long-term resilience? So, Regan, if I can start with you.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks to the other panelists and the audience. It's truly a pleasure to be here. My name is Regan Smith. I'm with Manulife Investment Management, where I work on the sustainable investing team in our real assets group in our private market. So looking at our real estate infrastructure, as well as in our private markets, our agriculture, and our timberland investments. And I'd like to, preface the conversation today, although after that presentation, I don't really know if we need it. Climate change and extreme weather is taking an increasing toll, especially on the built environment. Natural disaster figures for 2022 are dominated by events that, according to the latest findings, are more intense or are occurring more frequently, and often, in many cases, both of those trends apply. And there's a real social component, as another alarming aspect we're seeing and we're witnessing is that these natural disasters are hitting people in countries such as Palau especially hard. So a major challenge with the systemic risks is getting the consensus to tackle them swiftly. And it's human nature to call for more evidence and to promote sort of far-reaching change. But this avoidance of speed only, exacerbates the environmental risks. So, why am I sharing all of this? Is that as investors who bear a fiduciary duty to our clients, we truly believe that these systemic risks are highly relevant. And today, as I speak further about our real assets portfolios and our private markets, real estate and infrastructure, I'll share some of the things of how we're mitigating those risks, but also some of the opportunities we think are out there that we can leverage when we act swiftly to mitigate those risks.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Regan. Miyamoto.
Okay. I'm Miyamoto from Nippon Life. I'm charging ESG Investment Strategy Office. And as for climate resilience, for Nippon Life, climate resilience has been important and familiar for a long time before this climate issue became popular. This is because we've developed and maintained many buildings by ourselves from a long time ago. Yeah, and also Japan is a country with a lot of natural disasters, such as typhoon and earthquake and flood. So therefore, we have many technical specialists of real estate in our company and accumulate much knowledge about the physical risks. Example, regarding a geographical location, we make sure that the building is not an active fault or landslide hazard area. And also, heavy and continuous rain occurs and causes flood so often in Japan now, much more than before. We estimate the height of flood, and we check that the electrical devices of buildings, such as generator or pumps, settled above the height of flood. So you may think of Nippon Life as developer-like, but as an investor, as an asset owner, we began to use some indicators such as C-bar, which is climate value at risk, to manage your investment portfolio. I think it's useful to see the big picture of the portfolio, but I believe the physical risks are highly individualized in each case. So checking each project is the basic way, and as an asset owner, or checking asset manager whether they estimate each project is a basic way to manage the physical risk and to manage a portfolio, I think. But, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit long, but when checking each project, there is a big problem we are facing now. That's a physical risk in terms of income, not in terms of cost. Taking renewable energy project as an example, profitability of such project highly depends on climate-related factors, such as sunlight hours and wind speed, and so on. These factors are now showing the sign of change along with climate change, but it's very difficult to measure how much risks can be generated by these factors. In other words, it's very difficult to estimate how much income can decrease because of the climate-related factors. We investors have the ability to evaluate the physical risk of the cost side, but we are lack of income side data. So in my opinion, it'll be a big problem in the future And we have to tackle with that from at this moment because we were investing just now. I'm sorry, so wrong, I'm sorry, but it's all from me.
Great, thank you. Bertrand.
Thank you. Bertrand Millot, Head of Sustainability at CDPQ. CDPQ is the Quebec pension plan. We manage 420 billion Canadian dollars, mostly invested internally. So why is this an important issue for us? I'll give you a number of examples. A few years ago, we were discussing an investment in a warehouse near the Fraser River in Vancouver. It's a big river coming down from the mountains. And we detected that the risk of centennial flood would increase from 1% to 5%. So you think, well, 5%, who cares? What that means actually is the centennial flood will happen every 20 years. And that doesn't tell you that it's going to happen on the 31st of December of the 19th year. It could be tomorrow. And so, of course, we had to take this into account in making the investment decision to see whether the building was built appropriately, whether it was protected, resilient, etc. We satisfied ourselves, we made the investment, but nonetheless very important. And so here I was talking about physical damage. In my former life, as an investor in emerging markets, we invested in hotels on the Riviera Maya, and hurricanes went by, and our hotel was out of action for 1 entire year. It was damaged. We had insurance, and so we were okay from a financial point of view, but because all the hotels were damaged and there is only so much construction capacity in Mexico, it took 1 year to repair the damage. And a number of hotels that were nearby who had less resilient insurance companies actually faced the fact that their insurers were bust. So that's why it's important. And you need to think physical damage, but also loss of income for potentially very extended period. Another way to look at it, you can reassure yourself quite easily with climate models if you use things that are commonly accepted as thinking in finance. You think in fixed income, you look at loss given default and probability of default, so you apply that to climate. The risk of something happening is 2%, and let's say it'll have a 20% reduction on value on my investment, so we're talking 0.4%. And while that may happen over 20 years, time value of money, I have no risk in my portfolio. Well, that's a mirage. It could happen tomorrow again. So be very, very careful. And what we see now today in 2023 is that it is increasingly clear that there is issues with certain assets being insured. And remember also that insurance damage insurance contracts are for 1 year only, and therefore the insurer can revoke coverage after 1 year. And so that's why it's very important. We have over $100 billion worth of real assets in real estate and in infrastructure across the world. And we also invest in nature-based solutions, which are obviously, weather is a very important aspect. Thank you.
Thanks, Bertrand. Bruce.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bruce Chong from Arup, an engineering and planning consultancy global firm. I'm responsible for the climate and sustainability team across East Asia, looking after projects from carbon neutrality, climate resilience, circular economy to social impact. Now back to today's topic on climate physical risk. I'm trained as an engineer, and my research basically is on climate science. So what is important to us as a company, because all of our clients, they are building physical assets on infrastructure, on physical buildings. So basically, climate resilience is not new to engineering sector. We have been considering future climate for many years. It's just a matter of how we further make it more granular, more detailed, more accountable for the industry, and how to further improve the methodology in terms of the assessment. So I give you some examples. What are the key drivers to push us in terms of accelerating the engineering approach to make it more rigorous? There are key 3 drivers. During the process of doing the future climate assessment, the first one actually is they're asking, climate is locational specific. It's not like AR6 report. Of course, the climate scientists, they generate a lot of report, AR6 IPCC data, but this is sort of talking about 300, 400 kilometers by kilometers. So the grid is very coarse. If you're looking into a particular project or particular asset, it's talking about just within several hundred meters. So it needs to be locational specific, and how to accommodate this analysis. Number one, drivers. Number two is, what does it mean by worst case? SSP 8.5, is it the worst case? The answer is no. When we are doing engineering assessment, when we're doing actual project, you know, airport, metro lines, highway, tunnels, reclamation, etc., buildings as well. Worst case is not 8.5. I will tell you later, you know, in the second question. But this is another driver. The third driver basically is the design approach. A lot of people talking about the return period. Now, this building is based on a drainage system 1 in 200 years' time. Oh, it's very good already. No, it's based on historical data only. A lot of buildings, even nowadays, the current standards of a lot of countries, especially developing countries, not to mention developed countries, we are still updating our design standard, not only based on historical return period approach, but future climate approach, scenario-based approach. So these is the third drivers. So I'm quite fortunate to work with a lot of government, their engineers, their technical person, they drive all the approach, you know, in a more technical, scientific way to improve the robustness of physical infrastructure. I list out two another examples, not only from engineering sectors, from the financial people like you, and also from ESG people. The financial people, they're asking, okay, right, we are doing risk management. We are not only considering only technical or engineering approach. We need to balance the investment and risk. So they're asking for some quantification of, oh, under different scenarios, what are the damages? What are the interruptions? And also the devaluation of the properties, as well as you just mentioned, the probability of default or credit risk. So all these numbers needs to be transparent, need to be quantifiable. So these are the four factors that drive us to make the whole system more rigorous from the financial side. The fifth side, from ESG people. ESG people, basically, they're asking, what are the actions that we need to take? A lot of companies, they just do a portfolio level analysis, high level, put level. As long as I get the number, as long as that's the score, high, mid, low risk, you know, 3 categories, enough, stop it. Don't do it in more detail. But ESG people, they will further ask, oh, what are the actionable items based on your analysis? Sorry, I don't know. So this is the fifth factor that force us, you know, push us to do something more, because after the assessment, what are the actions that we need to take, balancing investment as well as risk?
Fantastic, thanks, Bruce. So it's been a lot already that we're going to try and pick up on in the rest of the conversation. Those action items, how it figures into investment decision making, the role of different stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot to go through. But Bertrand, you made a point around insurance. And I wanted to turn to you, Miyamoto, as representing an organization that focuses on insurance. Are you finding it increasingly difficult to invest in assets that are facing those high or extreme physical climate risk? And are you changing your investment strategies as a result?
Yeah, I think it's become very difficult to decide investing. So we haven't changed our strategy yet so much. But we feel some difficulties in conducting due diligence along with physical climate risk. And it's regarding insurance, coincidentally. I would like to talk about the non-life insurance. Also, we are a life insurance company. When doing some projects, sponsors usually use property insurances, you know, to deal with physical risks. But the premiums of such insurance has jumped up recently. Now in Japan, because of the climate change, typhoon becomes bigger, and heavy and continuous rain occurs so often, as I said before. It causes much more landslides than before. And then the insurance premium, especially about water damage, has increased, or worse, the limit of payout of insurance is restricted within only small amount. The problem is, I think, mismatched durations between investment in long term and insurance contracts in short term. For the project, income doesn't change for the long period, but the premium of insurance changes and rises in short term. So as a result, the project can be unprofitable. Also, investors can conduct a stress test to prepare for premium rising, but once the premium jumps up over the limit, property insurance company will restrict the payment amount, and then the project cannot fully cover the physical risk. But we investors cannot handle such risk. So I believe I have to consider physical risks much more carefully than before.
Thank you. And Bertrand and Regan, if I can turn to you now, perhaps to respond to Bruce's comments around, well, how does this go into the investment decision effectively? How do you turn these physical climate risk assessments into investment decisions? So interested to get your reflections on that question from both of your perspectives. Perhaps Regan, if you go first.
Sure, happy to kick it off. So, all of our real assets investments, have a forward-looking physical risk screening included just as part of the very early due diligence phase, and that's been in place for a couple of years now. Anything that's going up to the investment committee needs to have that, just included in the memos. But that's really just one start of it, and so the part that our team gets involved in during that investment is actually looking at some of the models. We've tested a number of different tools out there, and I don't think there's any perfect provider. There's probably some providers in the room here, but I don't think there's any perfect provider. I think the onus is on the user of the model and the tool to understand how frequently is it updated, what's the methodology behind the tools that are in place, what are the metrics that are rolling up to assess flood risk or heat risk, et cetera. And then with that, you can start to unpack and match it to the investment. So looking at what is the appropriate time scale that you're thinking about the investment and sort of feeding that in. I think the other piece that we look at in the investment then is then once we're armed with understanding what risks are available or what risks that investment is potentially exposed to, it's not always a no-go situation. It's really then, do we then engage more on-site due diligence, right? We've got teams of technical engineers that will go to site, and at that phase, we're looking at asking really specific questions, drilling down. In real estate, it might be, how much mechanical equipment is below grade? Is there a parking ramp that goes below grade without a berm? That type of thing. If it's, a rail line investment, it's looking at, what the heat impact might be on that rail or on the stations or the commuters of that jurisdiction. And that's where we start to have some really interesting discussions.
Thank you. Bertrand, any additional comments?
I won't repeat what was said because all this applies to us. We screen every single investment in real assets before making the investment decision, and we use actually two tools. One to identify which is cruder, to identify whether there should be any red flag, orange flag, yellow flag, or no flag. And then one which is much more detailed to look in detail when there's a concern has been raised. We have also screened and we've been doing that now for a couple of years. We have also screened our entire portfolio of assets that pre-existed to identify whether there were any issues. I would say, and what we're doing now on top, when we make the investment or for investments that we have in the portfolio, we actually put the report on the desk of the CEO of the company in question, because we don't run those companies. They have management teams and boards, but we say, here, we have identified an issue. What do you think about it, and what are you going to do? Very often it's a wake-up call, and we expect then a plan to strengthen the resilience of the asset. The other thing is one thing that we're doing is to look broadly. And I'll give you a real-life example, New Orleans after Katrina. New Orleans was devastated by the hurricane, and actually it never recovered. Yes, the city was cleaned up, etc., but companies left, and people left, because the place where their livelihoods were destroyed, their homes were destroyed. So you might own a lovely building in a city and say, well, my building is earthquake-proof, it's hurricane-proof, it's flood-proof, it's great, it's lovely. And then the houses of all the people who work in that building are going to be flattened. And if that happens twice, maybe the whole city will look at life differently, companies will decamp, and you'll have a permanent loss of value. So you need to look much beyond what we are financing. Another example of that is you say, well, I have a factory on a hill. Great, so there is no risk of flooding. Yes, but there is a bridge down there for the road, and the bridge might be washed away. And if you have no bridge, you have no business. And so you need to look at those simple examples, but I can tell you of a port that we own in a large city somewhere in the world, I won't say which one, where we know that the rail and road infrastructure that leads to the port are going to be underwater for tens of kilometers. And so we can fix the port, but if the government doesn't fix the road and the rail, it will serve no purpose. So you need to look broadly at these issues on physical risk to know what you're getting involved with.
No, it's a great point. I wanted to come on to that around what goes into these physical risk assessments, because I think the word physical almost makes you focus too much on the physical damage to your own asset or property or building or whatever it is, whereas there are these business continuity issues to address the operational resilience, the broader infrastructure around. Is it possible to capture those risks, challenges, using current tools and methodologies? Is there more to be done to help investors with those assessments? Again, maybe.
I think that the one interesting aspect that comes up is, it's certainly within our duty to understand the physical asset that we own or the portfolio company that we're working with. I completely agree. Putting that information in front of them and actually having a really meaningful dialogue with them around, here's the risk that we've identified, and let's work together to figure out how we can mitigate those risks is really key and speaks to the opportunities. The other element, though, is this much broader element, right? You've got the really point-specific location that might be at risk, but we live in a world that's so interconnected. You pointed out, a port connected to a bridge, to rail lines, buildings, you need commuters, you need people coming into the space. So the interesting element that, if I think forward into the future that I hope we will start to see is these really, coalescence around these national adaptation plans. So commitments to the Paris Agreement includes, commitments that countries create these national adaptation plans, and hopefully what they'll start to do is put together lists of infrastructure that really needs to be maintained to support that. I don't think we're there yet, but I'm jumping ahead to think about the future. I like to be a bit optimistic.
Bruce, do you want to come in here?
I think at least we need to do it from a high level first. I mean, I don't disagree. We need to do sort of a high level, squid level. But if we haven't done any screening exercise, we need to do it. Just like we need to do a body check every year, right? It's an overall inspection of our portfolio across all the key hazards, from flooding, strong wind, extreme temperature, water stress, etc. So once we've done this exercise, we can identify which one is more vulnerable to these hazards, and then we can do something more. So that's why we need to do some sort of deep dive analysis with respect to those high-risk properties in order to identify some actions for the operational team, facility management team. And so this is sort of the step-by-step process. And then Reagan mentioned about the interconnectivity between different systems. Now, this is also important, but I think this would be usually be done in a second step. So once we identify the risk in individual asset, then obviously or laterally, we need to also identify the connectivity between my asset to utilities, for example, gas pipes, water pipes, electricity, etc., and also to transport the assets, the assets and all the transport-related issues.
Yeah.
So these are the normal steps that we usually go through with the client.
So can you speak to some of the work that you've done in this space in terms of, I guess, once you've gone past that initial screening stage, identified where solutions are needed, what are some of the solutions that you've been able to work on?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit in the beginning about the climate and also the hazard. Now the climate, I think if we need to do deep dive, we need to have climate scientists to help us to do it more location specific. For example, in this region, Miyamoto mentioned about typhoon, and it's very common here. And then for an engineering project, an airport, we need to analyze, for example, the scenario of super typhoon direct hit scenario. So it's directly hit your airport. So what would happen? So this is sort of the downscaling of respective climatic parameters to my location. So this is the first point. And secondly, we need to associate these future climatic parameters to the hazard models. So hazard models meaning when we have the future rainfall, future strong wind from the super typhoon, and then the storm, and then the wind will induce the storm surge, meaning the water push from the coastal to the inland. So all these climatic parameters need to be put in the hazard model. Now the hazard model, again, I mentioned about what would be the worst case. So it will be analyzed in the hazard model. For example, I take an airport as an example again. Airport by the ocean usually, a lot of, in Japan, a lot of airport by the ocean, same, apply in this region. So what would be the worst scenario in an airport? Now the worst would be, assuming I said typhoon direct hit, and then storm surge because of the typhoon, and in the meantime you have high tide, and in the meantime you have a very, very heavy rainfall. All happens simultaneously. So are we going to analyze this scenario? From an engineering perspective, as a responsible consultant, I need to do so, right? In order for the government, the airport authority to consider this probable scenario. And then, of course, having said this scenario, of course, there's second worst, third worst, So there would be a range of scenarios, meaning a combination of different climatic parameters. And then each climatic parameters would be subject to different SSP emission scenario. So when we talk about scenario, be careful what you're talking about. We're talking about a hazard scenario with a combination of different climatic parameters under different emission scenarios. So get what I mean? Now, so this is the second step. Analysis of multiple hazard, essential for analysis for the third step. The third step is about the investment on engineering solution and hardcore solution. So it's talking about now, there are different types of scenarios. Now, Mr. Client, you need to design your engineering solution with respect to this. Now, obviously speaking, the highest scenario, meaning the worst one, would be the most expensive, or 50 meter in height seawall, for example, etc. a little bit. But it's not the solution. But you need to tell the client, or you need to balance the solutions by, for example, you usually go to the third one. For example, you need to deal with 2050 or 200 to the end of this century. But at the end of the day, you can't mitigate all risk because of cost, obviously. So, which will also come to the last point about the continuity, about the soft measures, right? The client, they need to balance the investment and risk. And at the end of the day, it's not only hardcore solutions, engineering solutions, but about the continuity plan, how much, for example, drainage system available to absorb all the water, to drink all the water during the worst case if the seawall cannot cope with it. Now, these are the continuity plan, emergency plan also needs to be in place associated with all the hardcore measures. So these are something that we have done. I use airport as an example, but this is the typical approach that we are doing for both building and infrastructure.
Great, thank you. So what comes next? What's needed to scale investor action on resilience? Maybe Regan, I'll turn to you first. Any thoughts on what are your next steps?
Yeah, I'll start with a simple one. I just came from the previous session on data in private markets, and on real estate portfolios, it's really easy to have the physical location data of your assets. It becomes a little bit more complex when you start to look at other portfolios. And while it seems so simple, actually just collecting the physical location, if you've got an investment in a cell tower company, actually understanding where all 500 cell towers are, geographically, so you can start to map them to do that physical risk assessment and start. And what I think is a little bit exciting about that, and maybe this is just because I'm an engineer, but of knowing that sort of physical location, is you can also use that location for another great need out there, which is on nature. To really understand your impact on nature, it can't be on a broad scale. It really needs to be on a local scale. So we're actually in our sustainable investment teams really honing down on collecting really good detailed location data that we can then use to leverage for a number of these different assessments. So that's like a really, I like to start with really simple things and cross them off my list. So that's what we've got on the board right now.
Sounds good. Miyamoto, what do you think's needed to scale investor action on resilience? Where do you think investors should get started?
I think 2 points we have to start considering. The first one is data, and second one is focus and inclusion. Data, as others says before, we have to gather accident data because physical risks are very located with much variety, very unique in each case. So understanding many cases is significant to evaluate. So I think for a company, if there is a platform where investors can accumulate or share the accident cases, it's very useful. I think if we can get together and make such a platform, it will be useful, I think. And the second point is forecast. It's very difficult, I think. Investors can familiar or evaluate happened accident. To evaluate a happened accident is not so difficult, but really difficult thing is to deal with unknown risks, how to evaluate the unknown risks we may encounter in the future. So the difficult case is COVID-19, I think. Before COVID had happened, no investors cared about that, but I think academic studies, it was warned before. So as regarding to climate change, the same thing may happen. So we investors have to make much closer connection with academic sector and study cutting edge studies, so data and to deal with unknown risks is very important, I think.
Great, thank you. Bertrand.
I was in the previous session in the main room. We were talking about scenario analysis and tools to appraise transition risk, and there was a poll made about what the audience, so you, believed in terms of which trajectory we were on, and only 7% said 1.5 degree. So that means that physical risk is going to increase. And what I would say is don't be lulled by numbers that come out of black box models from vendors. Understand them, understand what's in the black box. Finance methods, as I said earlier, is not adapted to thinking about physical risk, and those reflexes that we all have because we work in finance should be put aside and really understand what the issues are, understand where the risk comes from, whether it's relevant to the business, and what is the likelihood of occurrence within a certain period, and on that basis decide what to do. don't multiply small percentage by small percentage because you'll be lulled to sleep and the awakening will be very rude when it happens.
And Bruce.
Well, given most of us from the financial sector, we challenged, in addition to doing some high-level, quick-level portfolio analysis, why don't we try some advanced level portfolio level analysis? Just observe a lot of high-level analysis, mostly just purely based on some climate exposure. IPCC L6, and then by regions or by district, quite high level. But we could potentially analyze one level more. For example, you analyze what we call the adaptive capacity. No need to be very detailed, no need to do any modeling, but at least you need to look into the physical location. You know, where are the properties? Where does it locate? And is it at high level? Is it by the ocean? What is the peripheral area? So basically topography, the topography, you know, around the surrounding. We call it adaptive capacity. Even you look at the surrounding area, not to look into inside systems. You already have some more intelligence to tell the risk of the corresponding properties or infrastructure. So what we call sort of more advanced level of portfolio level analysis would even, you know, would be much more helpful for you to further analyze or sort of select which one is more prone or subject to extreme hazard.
Great, thank you. We don't have a huge amount of time left for questions. I do want to give the audience a very quick opportunity to ask one, perhaps two questions, depending on how quick they are and how quick the answers are. The back there, James.
Thank you very much. James Lockhart-Smith from Barris Maplecroft. We provide ESG and sustainability analytics. So the TCFD recommendations on physical risk originally were incredibly vague, just like show us the amount or percentage of assets that are vulnerable. But more recently, we've seen a shift through regulations. It seems like it's pushing investors to a place where they're going to need to show financial metrics quite explicitly. So tail value at risk, annual average loss, things like that. And obviously all asset classes have very, very different requirements. Every portfolio seems to be different in terms of time horizon. You know, we've heard about some of that on the panel. I mean, do you kind of agree with that assessment that you would see this shift towards actual, you know, an actual requirement for being quite specific about financial outcomes, perhaps using quantitative techniques borrowed from the insurance industry or imported from the insurance industry? And if so, and building on a comment Bertrand made, I mean, do you want to rely on like cookie cutter black box models from vendors? Or do you want to design your own damage functions and kind of come up with something you really understand to be able to defend it in front of regulators? Instead of just, you know, heat mapping your portfolio and saying, here's the percentage which is red on a map, instead being really quite specific.
Yeah. I think it's a very good question. I think it depends on the materiality of the assets and their level of exposure. And I would say at first, you know, especially if you're starting. You know, we have buildings in New York. We own 100% of buildings in New York that are worth several $billion. And so that's material. Infrastructure projects that we do also, it's multi-billion-dollar investments, and therefore it is highly material and we need to know. Whereas if I look at listed equities, for example, and you tell me what's the physical risk on the Home Depot has thousands of stores in North America. If one or two gets hit, is that going to change to move the needle? Probably not really much, and therefore not urgent to look at. So I say understand your portfolio and look at where you need to deep dive. And then if you need to do, and deep dive means individual assessments. And then if you need to do overall calculations of overall risk on average, then those models are probably okay, but they're going to give you a number which you can report on, but you know, the level of certainty on that number is anybody's guess, really.
30 seconds for a question, 30 seconds for an answer.
Much appreciated. That's a bit easier. Zoe Witten from Pollination. question that I had is about, we've started to see situations where owners of assets, particularly infrastructure assets, are increasingly held accountable for a moving target as far as their, let's say, their resilience approvals, let's call it, Bruce. And we've had a couple of cases, including in the States, where we've had infrastructure assets that have been, when they were built, all right, and then the world is moving and the envelope that they have to operate is moving. Do you think, and maybe this is for you, Bruce, do you think we're going to have assets that basically age out faster than they otherwise would age out because the physical environment around them is changing so much faster than it would normally do? And if that's the case, do you think that even, let's say, our public risk management and approval systems are equipped for that, let's call it in developed markets, or not?
Well, I don't have an answer, but usually in the scenario testing exercise, we need to consider sort of the worst case. I identify together with the client, what could happen. So usually the worst case is really worse. For example, the melting of ice sheet, in both North Pole and South Pole. So it's really a balancing between the investment and also the risk management. And if there is some sort of residual risk, how to cope with it. So there's always been some solutions to deal with the residual risk through operational, through emergency control, continuity plan. I think we need to live with it if we can't, fully cope with it. Yeah.
Right. I'll just add something quick. Building codes, even in rich countries, are antiquated, and look at climate by cutting out the extremes and saying, well, that's the parameters within which to build, which is exactly the wrong thing to do in a climate change scenario. So I'm afraid the answer to your question is yes, even new built today in rich countries.
Well, just one point to add. Well, when we are talking about 8.5 and 6.5, usually infrastructure won't, in the first day, build to 8.5 because of cost. But we need to adapt to 8.5 in future by providing enabling facilities. In future, if it happens, then engineers, facility manager can further do something on top of it instead of from scratch. Yeah.
Great. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. I'm sure if there are more questions, then our panelists will be very happy to take them in, personally here. Just wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to Keiden for setting the scene. Thank you all for your attending.